Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The relic felt heavy in Aiden's hands, the weight of history pressing into his palms as though it carried the burdens of 1,000 lost souls. He wiped the grime from the sword's hilt, revealing a symbol that had been all but forgotten. 2 lightning bolts crossed over a storm cloud, the insignia of the legendary Storm Knights. Tales of the Storm Knights had been whispered to children as bedtime stories, myths of an ancient order that once defended the realms from both physical and magical threats. Now, the knights were just that, myths. But standing there in the ruins of an old fortress deep in the wilderness, Aiden knew this sword was no mere fable. He had ventured far from his family's modest estate, driven by a yearning for something more. Aiden wasn't content with the simple life of a minor noble's son, bound to the responsibilities of land and harvests. He wanted to be something greater, to leave a mark on the world. And now, fate had given him away. This sword, this relic of the Storm Knights, was his key to something far grander than he had ever imagined. As he sheathed the sword, he couldn't shake the feeling that the past wasn't as dead as people believed. The air seemed to hum with untapped energy, the faintest whispers of a storm brewing on the horizon. Aiden knew he had to learn more. The journey to the old city of Kalar was treacherous, but Aiden was no stranger to rough roads. As he rode his horse through winding forest paths and across wide, desolate plains, he kept his hand close to the sword, always alert. The world had grown dangerous in recent years. Kingdoms were at each other's throats over resources, and the natural disasters that had ravaged the land made survival even more uncertain. Floods, fires, and storms appeared without warning, each one worse than the last. The people whispered that the gods were angry, but Aiden now suspected there was more to it. When he reached Kalar, he sought out Erithis, an elderly historian who was said to be one of the few people still alive who knew the truth about the Storm Knights. His inquiries led him to a dilapidated building in the heart of the city, where time itself seemed to have worn the stones down to dust. Erithis was a relic in his own right, with a hunched back and gnarled hands that shook as he pulled ancient scrolls from his shelves. His eyes, however, were still sharp, as if age had only concentrated his wisdom. The Storm Knights, Erithis muttered, unrolling a map that detailed forgotten locations across the land. Most think they're just a story for children, but I know better. They were real, once. And their downfall, he paused, his face darkening. Well, let's just say their enemies were many. Aiden listened intently as the historian recounted tales of the Order's glory days, how they had mastered the elemental forces of the sky and wielded the power of storms to defend the land from invaders and monsters alike. But then came the betrayals. Internal strife had torn the Order apart, and their enemies had taken advantage of the chaos. The Knights were wiped out, or so everyone thought. Their fortress, the Storm Fortress, still stands, Erithis continued. But it's hidden, lost to time. You must find it if you wish to revive the Order. But be warned, boy, there are others who seek to destroy what's left of the Storm Knights. Lord Sereth, 4-1. Aiden leaned forward. Sereth? Who is he? A sorcerer, Erithis said, his voice barely above a whisper. A powerful one. He seeks to control the storms themselves, to use their power for his own ends. If you wish to restore the Storm Knights, you will have to face him. With that, Aiden set off again, this time with a clearer sense of purpose. He would find the Storm Fortress, gather whatever remained of the Knights' knowledge, and rebuild the Order. The storm was coming, and if Sereth controlled it, all would be lost. Aiden's quest led him far and wide, through dark forests, across treacherous mountains, and into hidden valleys where no man had walked for centuries. Along the way, he encountered others who were drawn to his mission, people who believed in the cause and were willing to fight for it. He first met Lyra in the northern woods, where she lived as a hunter. Lyra was an archer of unparalleled skill, her arrows able to hit targets at impossible distances. When Aidan explained his quest, she seemed skeptical at first, but something in his conviction swayed her. She agreed to join him, and together, they continued their search for others who might still believe in the legend of the Storm Knights. Their next ally was Thorn, a grizzled mercenary who had seen more battles than Aidan could count. Thorn had a hard edge to him, a look in his eyes that spoke of years of betrayal and violence. But despite his rough demeanor, Thorn proved to be a valuable asset. He had connections in the underworld and could get them information and supplies where others would fail. However, Aidan could never quite shake the feeling that Thorn was hiding something. The mercenary was always a little too evasive when asked about his past, and there were times when Aidan caught Thorn watching him with a calculating look that made his skin crawl. Still, Thorn had proven his loyalty thus far, and Aidan knew they couldn't afford to be picky with their allies. The forces against them were growing stronger by the day. As they searched for the storm fortress, they encountered numerous obstacles. Mercenaries and bandits, hired by Sereth, ambushed them on more than one occasion. These attacks were always sudden and vicious, but each time, Aidan's group fought them off. As their reputation grew, so did the danger. Aidan realized that they were being hunted. Sereth knew about his quest, and he was doing everything in his power to stop it. It was during one of these ambushes that Aidan discovered the true extent of Lyra's skill. Surrounded by enemies, she loosed a flurry of arrows with such speed and precision that their attackers didn't stand a chance. By the time the dust settled, she had felled a dozen men without missing a single shot. "That's why I keep you around," Aidan said with a grin, wiping blood from his sword. Lyra raised an eyebrow. "I thought it was for my sparkling personality." They shared a rare moment of levity, but it was short-lived. As they ventured deeper into enemy territory, the dangers grew more severe. The closer they got to finding the storm fortress, the more determined Sereth's forces became. Then, one night, as they camped in the shadow of a crumbling stone tower, the betrayal came. Aidan had always suspected something was off with Thorn, but he never could have predicted the extent of it. While Aidan and Lyra slept, Thorn slipped away into the night, leaving behind a trail of destruction. He had sabotaged their supplies, stolen vital maps, and worse, sent a signal to Sereth's forces. By the time Aidan realized what had happened, it was too late. Their camp was surrounded. "I always knew that bastard couldn't be trusted," Lyra spat as they prepared for the inevitable fight. "What are we going to do?" Aidan gripped the hilt of his sword, the weight of the relic heavy in his hands. "We fight," he said grimly. "We fight, and we survive. The Storm Knights don't give up." The enemy came at them hard and fast. Aidan barely had time to shout a warning before the first wave was upon them. Lyra had her bow ready in an instant, loosing arrows with deadly precision, each one finding its mark before the attackers even knew where they were coming from. Aidan drew his sword, the ancient relic humming with power as it clashed against the steel of his foes. The night air crackled with tension, the distant rumble of thunder growing louder as if the storm itself was answering his call. They fought back to back, cutting down the mercenaries one after another, but the numbers were overwhelming. For every enemy they felled, two more took their place, each more determined than the last. Aidan's arms burned from the effort, but he couldn't afford to slow down. Thorn's betrayal had left them exposed, and Sereth's forces had the advantage. They had to get out, or they wouldn't live to see the dawn. "There's too many," Lyra shouted over the chaos, her voice strained but steady. Aidan knew she was right. They couldn't win this fight outright. They needed a way out. His eyes scanned the landscape, searching for any possible escape route, and then he saw it, a narrow ravine to the east, just beyond the tree line. If they could reach it, they might be able to lose their pursuers in the dense woods beyond. Head for the ravine, he ordered, cutting down a man who had gotten too close. We can lose them in the forest. Lyra nodded, already moving in that direction as she fired off another shot. Aiden followed close behind, his sword swinging in wide arcs to clear the path ahead. They made a break for the ravine, dodging arrows and avoiding blades as they weaved through the chaos. The storm above them was growing stronger, dark clouds swirling ominously overhead, as if nature itself sensed the rising conflict. They reached the edge of the ravine just as a bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the battlefield in a flash of brilliant white. For a moment, Aiden thought the storm had struck directly, but then he saw the figure standing on the ridge above them, Sereth. The sorcerer was cloaked in shadow, his long robes whipping in the wind as the storm gathered around him. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and in his outstretched hand, he held a staff crackling with raw elemental power. You thought you could escape me, boy? Sereth's voice boomed across the field, unnaturally loud, carried on the wind as though the storm itself were speaking. The power of the storm belongs to me. You and your pathetic knights are relics of a forgotten past. Aiden's heart pounded in his chest, not from fear but from a rising sense of anger. Thorn's betrayal, the relentless pursuit, and now this, he had had enough. He raised his sword, the symbol of the Storm Knights gleaming in the pale light of the storm. We're not relics, Aiden shouted back. And the storm will never belong to you. Sereth's laughter was like thunder, deep and echoing. Foolish child. You don't even know the true power of the relic you hold. You cannot control the storm, and without control, you will fall, like the rest of your order. Before Aiden could respond, Sereth raised his staff high, and with a flick of his wrist, he unleashed the full fury of the storm. Lightning struck the ground all around them, the air vibrating with energy as the earth trembled beneath their feet. Lyra stumbled but quickly regained her balance, her eyes wide as she realized what they were up against. We need to move, now, she urged, tugging at Aiden's arm, but Aiden didn't move. Something had changed. He could feel the relic sword humming with power in his hand, almost as if it was reacting to the storm. A deep, primal force was stirring within him, something ancient and powerful, something connected to the very essence of the storm itself. And then, in a moment of clarity, Aiden understood, the Storm Knights had never controlled the storm. They had become one with it. He closed his eyes and let the power of the storm wash over him, feeling the energy course through his veins like fire. The wind whipped around him, lifting his cloak as the storm seemed to center on him, swirling and raging but no longer against him. Aiden raised his sword, and as he did, the lightning arced toward it, drawn to the relic as though it recognized its true master. Lyra stared in disbelief as Aiden stood there, unharmed, in the midst of the storm. The lightning crackled around him but did not strike, bending to his will. Aiden opened his eyes, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of the Storm Knight's legacy. This was the power they had wielded, the power that Sereth sought but could never truly control. Sereth's eyes narrowed in fury as he realized what was happening. No, he bellowed, slamming his staff into the ground. The storm is mine. But it wasn't. Not anymore. With a surge of strength, Aiden channeled the storm's power through the sword, and in a blinding flash of light, he unleashed it upon Sereth. The sorcerer raised his staff in defense, but it was too late. The force of the storm tore through his defenses, sending him hurtling back across the ridge. His body crackled with electricity as he fell, disappearing into the darkness below. the storm began to calm almost immediately, the clouds thinning as the wind died down. Aiden stood there, panting, his sword still crackling with residual energy. Lyra approached cautiously, her bow still in hand. "Is it over?" she asked, glancing at the spot where Sereth had fallen. Aiden wasn't sure. Sereth was powerful, and he doubted the sorcerer had been defeated so easily. But for now, the immediate danger had passed, and they had survived. "We need to find the others," Aiden said, lowering his sword. "There's no time to waste." The journey to the storm fortress took them through lands ravaged by years of conflict and natural disaster, but Aiden and Lyra pressed on, determined to reach their destination. They had faced too many challenges to turn back now, and with Sereth temporarily out of the way, they had a small window of opportunity. When they finally reached the hidden stronghold, the sight was both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking. The storm fortress, once a magnificent stronghold of the Storm Knights, now lay in ruins. Its towering walls were crumbled, and the great halls were empty, overgrown with vines and moss. But even in its dilapidated state, Aiden could feel the lingering power of the place. This was where the Storm Knights had once trained, where they had learned to wield the power of the storm. Aiden and Lyra spent days exploring the fortress, uncovering ancient texts, weapons, and artifacts that had been left behind. There were no surviving knights, but the legacy of the order lived on in the knowledge they had left behind. As Aiden trained with the relics, he grew stronger, more attuned to the power of the storm. Lyra trained alongside him, her skills with the bow sharpening with each passing day. Slowly, they began to rebuild the Storm Knights, recruiting others who shared their vision. It wasn't easy, and the threat of Sereth still loomed over them, but they were determined to restore the order to its former glory. But the final betrayal came from within. Thorn, who had disappeared after betraying them to Sereth, reappeared one night, sneaking into the fortress under the cover of darkness. He had been working for Sereth all along, feeding him information and sabotaging their efforts from within. His return was marked by an attack on the fortress that left many of their new recruits dead and the fortress in even worse disrepair. Aiden confronted Thorn in the heart of the fortress, their battle fierce and brutal. Thorn had been a formidable fighter, but he underestimated Aiden's connection to the storm. In the end, Aiden channeled the storm's power through his sword, delivering a fatal blow to the traitor. With Thorn defeated, Aiden knew the final battle with Sereth was imminent. The storm was coming, and only the Storm Knights stood in its way.